today the police are going to be asked questions about whether they might have been slightly overzealous when they arrested all those people from Republic, the Republican organisation, who had apparently done a deal with the police to go and demonstrate at the coronation, but were then arrested and weren't able to do so. However, as I said earlier to Claire Fox, there were plenty of people who were able to demonstrate on behalf of Republic. They just weren't actually able to set up their loudspeaker system, and they weren't able to do whatever it was that they wanted to do in some way, shape or form. We've spoken as well about the coronation. Peter Hitchens is here now with us to tell us what he made of it all and the matters arising from it. Also, we will be talking about the NHS, who apparently think it's a good idea to spend £240 million rather, on some kind of new phone system, which apparently is going to make it a lot easier for people to make bookings with their GP. Now, if it was that simple, surely they could have done that earlier. Apparently all you need is a phone to get through to the GPs.
Well, maybe. I actually had a very good experience,
Did you?
I have to say, with the GP a couple of weeks ago, using, which obviously would exclude anybody who doesn't do this, simply using an online system.
Yeah.
Where I very quickly got their attention, very quickly spoke to somebody who actually understood what I was on about, and very quickly got an actual appointment.
Oh, that's good.
So I have to say that I do live in one of the best appointed parts of the country in Oxford, and I'm undoubtedly lucky, but I can't pretend that I was badly treated. The interesting thing was that when I finally got a prescription, that it was quite difficult to get.
Right.
Apparently there are quite widespread shortages of major drugs, which you simply cannot get. I had to hunt around for hours.
I think that's a function of the inefficiency of the system, though, more than it is about why there should be shortages. Because it seems to me, you go into any Boots now or any sort of chemist chain, and half the stuff that you used to be able to buy, you can't buy.
The things are not on the shelves.
Because they don't stock it anymore.
Well, anything you want is now online, first of all, and actual shops are being as second-class places to shop. And it's another thing. I like Bovril. I know this is eccentric, but I do. And it's become impossible to find.
Really?
I eventually found it in an enormous Tesco's a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And they had four jars in the whole gigantic airport-sized shop.
I like to think of myself as a bit of a gourmand, but occasionally I have a taste for Knorr chicken noodle soup in a packet. And it's very good if you've got a cold. Can't find it anywhere. I ended up buying it in France because I found it in a French supermarket.
There is
I don't know why.
Extraordinary number of things to which this is happening.
And this happens to me a lot, because I don't shop much, but I shop at sort of Christmas time. You're buying presents for people, and the number of times I went into a shop and they would say, "Oh, we don't have that in stock at the moment, but we can order it for you."
Yeah.
I'm like, if I wanted you to order it for me, I would have ordered it myself and had it sent to me.
Yeah, except that every time you do that, you help to sign the death warrant of the actual shop.
Well, that's true, but my point is...
do you see the way shops are transforming? So over and over again, you go to shop, there are no staff.
No.
It's all automatic robot machines. I used to try to fight against this.
Yes.
But I've given up now. Because
have you seen these new Amazon shops?
Yes, I have. There's one just out.
There's one in Southwark Street. Yeah. Which I've never been in. I go past it quite regularly. And apparently you enter it by using some kind of QR code because you have to be an Amazon Prime customer. That's right. And you go in and there's nobody in there who works there. No, that's all. You
just take what you want and they charge you for it.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
It's really ghastly.
I don't see how this is going to improve the world. I've never seen how it's going to improve the world, sacking lots of people.
Because I like to go into a shop, and if necessary, if there's somebody there, I was in a shop buying some paving stones of all things the other day, and I had to buy spirit level, and it was in one of those massive, great, warehouses. And I thought I could be here all day looking for spirit level, so I'm going to ask somebody. And it took me ages to find someone to ask. Well, eventually I did.
In my hunt for Bovril, I was very lucky to find in Tesco's.
Yes.
A very pleasant woman in the fresh vegetables department who said, "Yeah, I know where it is," and conducted me.
That's helpful. And where was it that you couldn't find it? Where was it?
I didn't. Where does one look? I'll tell you one thing where it wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't with the Marmite.
Would it have been with the stock or something, maybe?
No. It was in some really obscure corner.
This is the thing. They move stuff all the time.
Oh, they do that.
And that is a practice that they use to make you buy things you didn't know you wanted.
That's right. Yeah, the whole thing is the lighting lowers your blink rate, so you become more mesmerised. The trick is to go to supermarkets with a bicycle. Then you can't buy everything because you keep having to say, "I can't carry this home."
Yes. Stephen in Belfast says, "Tell Peter you can get Bovril in Home Bargains. It's a discount chain you may not be aware of."
I have to say I haven't come across
I haven't heard of them.
But I'll obviously have to get to know them this way.
No, but it's funny how things suddenly run out. And it's only ever to do with inefficiency, in my view. It's like when the tomatoes supposedly ran out. They only ran out in some places. They didn't run out because there were no tomatoes.
Well, I don't know about that. All I know is that it's an odd thing that the shelves are often empty, and the thing that we started this with, the chemist's business.
Yes.
When I said to the pharmacist behind the counter what's going on, he said, well, this is happening all the time now. People are coming in here with perfectly normal prescriptions. I can't fill them because we can't get the drugs.
Right.
And I thought that was quite a problem.
Yes, I imagine it is. It's an interesting subject, actually. We may have to look into that.
Yeah.
See what we can find out about it. But let's talk about the Penny Mordaunt and the sword. You wrote about that this weekend.
Well, she was obviously the star of the whole coronation. Though oddly enough, I found the coronation show curiously flat.
Did you?
Yeah, I think the cameras were too close. I just think that
you didn't capture the sort of majesty of it.
I think it would actually been better, more moving, more memorable if it had been in flickery old black and white.
Yes.
And if all the shots had been from afar off.
Just one camera position.
The moment where the king had to get into that gold lame dressing gown.
Yes.
So I thought that would have been so much better if we hadn't been so close.
I see what you mean, because when you are as close as that, you are literally there. And so you don't get the majesty of it.
You don't. It's a composed picture. It's this small group of people standing in the centre of an enormous building, surrounded by other people watching, and there's a sense of ceremony and mystery about the fact that they're standing there in this small knot.
Right.
Much better, in my view, portrayed by those wonderful shots they sometimes do from high up above.
Yes.
Than from having the camera, high definition camera, pushing right into the middle so you can see the Archbishop's nostril hair. I don't want to see the Archbishop's nostril hair.
No,
he doesn't want me to see it.
No.
It's not necessary. It was too close, and I felt strangely flat. And the couple of times I've watched the old film of the 53 coronation, I found it very moving, and that's in colour. Though also the other thing which I still remember as being extraordinarily moving was the Winston Churchill funeral. Yeah. Which was in black and white when I saw it, and I've never seen it in anything other than black and white.
There is something about black and white footage, isn't there?
It gives something it puts perspective in. It makes you feel as if you're in the future looking at the past.
Well, do you know, my father, who was a very perspicacious individual, said to me once when everybody else had got a coloured TV and we still had a black and white one, I said, can we not get a colour television? He said, this is the only place you can see things in black and white.
All right.
Which was a great way of answering the question, and it was absolutely right.
And it saved him a bob or two as well.
In the same way that when you look at old photographs, news photographs in particular, in black and white, they're amazing.
They're much more evocative than colour photographs. Yeah. What colour photographs tend to do, there were a couple on the internet last week of 1930s Berlin, colour photographs. Yeah. It did look much less sinister as a result. Yeah. Which is not actually what you want it to look.
No, exactly.
It ought to look sinister.
Exactly.
But
to go back to the Penny Mordaunt thing, I'd noticed, I think, a couple of maybe days earlier that she was in one of the rehearsals, because I remembered suddenly, was at the time the sort of liaison, wasn't she, between the royals and Parliament, because she was the one when Charles was signing the book.
Well, doing all the accession stuff.
She was doing all that, wasn't she?
She's very good at that. I think. She has a very good sense of the ceremonial, and it really did stand out. And I think that continued into the sword bearing. But everybody I spoke to afterwards said, "Wow, Penny Mordaunt then." Yeah. It was the thing which everybody really wanted to talk about. There wasn't, I don't think, in the whole actual ceremony, a moment involving the king which people would want to talk about so much, was there? It all went more or less okay. Nobody dropped anything. No. Justin Welby was obviously having great trouble getting the crown on his head, going backwards and forwards. But one hopes for things like that to happen, because every coronation in the history of the country,
both of the crowns looked quite precarious, it seemed to me.
Well, you saw the lip reading on the palace balcony, where both obviously Camilla and Charles had been quite worried about their crowns falling off.
Because they didn't look as if they were on properly. And you're kind of standing there. You'd have to stand like with your head incredibly still.
You can't look up.
And Angela Levin was just telling us that apparently Camilla's got quite a big head. I don't know if that's a factor.
I wouldn't know.
But I suppose you can't make the thing bigger or smaller, can you?
Well, you can change the lining a bit, I think. But there's obviously a technique.
No, the sort of the vaguely eccentric, fascinating bit for me was when they were presenting all the things on cushions, like the spurs and the ring. And I was worried at one point they were going to try and put the ring on his finger because it looked like it wouldn't fit. And that would have been a bit embarrassing.
They dispensed with that, and the single glove.
Yes, the glove.
Yeah.
So that was all a bit weird, but kind of interesting, I thought.
It is interesting, and if you read the actual... I mean, the one to read is the 1953 service, which is significantly different from Saturday's.
Yes.
It explains a lot of this stuff. Though, actually, the Saturday service, there is a version of it which Lambeth Palace has put on the internet, in which they do try to explain every single one of these things.
Right.
Which is worth looking up if you're interested in those matters.
Yes.
So they did dispense with some key words in the presentation of the sword.
Yeah. And the sword carrying itself, I don't think anybody had predicted, so that kind of surprised everybody, didn't it?
I don't think anybody had. No, I hadn't expected it.
Right. And I presume that was also done in 53. And
Well, I don't know who did it in 53. I kept meaning to look it up. But if it was, of course, the Lord President of the Council would have been an elderly geezer with white hair, which wouldn't have had quite the same effect as this woman got up as
there was definitely
something
science fictionally about it.
Well, the people were saying it was like Game of Thrones and all that. I thought she looked... There's something about the laurel pattern on the hat. I thought she looked like some sort of Roman pagan deity, I have to say. One of the fiercer, not particularly...
great look, though.
It certainly was.
Tremendous.
But I don't think it's going to carry her into Downing Street.
I don't think it will, no.
It's not enough.
No, exactly right. And as far as the Welby kind of Pledge of Allegiance was concerned, that was all a bit low-key as well in the end, wasn't it?
It went off badly because people misinterpreted it, I think. It wasn't... I think it was fundamentally a bad idea. But I think the difficulty is always in these things. If I'm in church and we say the creed or the general confession, these are things which, if I were asked to say in the middle of the office, I might hesitate a bit. But because I'm in church with other people doing it, and then the words trip off my tongue. And saying something like that at home in front of your family, or indeed, as I was on Saturday, in an office, is quite difficult.
Yes.
And a lot of people wouldn't have wanted to do it, whereas if they'd been in the Abbey, they would have done it without hesitation.
Right. So it would have been better if he had just not said, this is what we recommend and invite you to do.
It's actually one of the reasons why people should try going to church. It involves you so much more in great ceremonial
which is why those big sort of long lens shots of the church are much more interesting, because you can actually see the architecture of the church, which is quite important.
And that it's full of people. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, listen, we're going to stop for a moment. We'll come back, though. We may talk about VE Day, apparently it's today, which we haven't mentioned yet, and also a study about marijuana, which may now be behind 30% of schizophrenia cases in young men. So we'll get into that. Incredibly, 78 years ago, the Second World War ended in Europe. I mean, I don't know why that sentence surprises me, but it seems longer ago than I suppose in my head it is. Well, 78 years.
Yes, well, I think it dominates our discourse so much, even today. If you have an argument about any foreign policy issue, what people will compare it with is Munich in 1938 and Neville Chamberlain. When they're talking about war, it's always Winston Churchill in the Battle of Britain, or in America, Pearl Harbor. The events were so huge, and what followed was so enormous, and the numbers of people who died or whose families were directly affected by it. I mean, I was growing up, I shouldn't think there was anybody I knew whose fathers had not been in the war to some extent.
No, exactly right.
And we are still, to some extent, the generation which dominates all discussion. So, although when you look at it, you realise rationally it is a very long time ago. And say by the 1920s, people were not saying much about the Crimean War, which was about the same distance from them as...
Were they saying much about the First World War?
They were saying a lot about the First World War, because in the 1920s that was only 10 years before.
Yeah.
It's endured for... It's become actually the sort of moral myth of our age. Much more important for most people in Western Europe and America, I think, than the Bible in terms of a source of moral instruction. This is where there were good people and bad people, and the good people won.
Thankfully. We were talking just now about black and white pictures, and I'm looking at some quite amazing old black and white pictures of VE Day, and people celebrating, soldiers celebrating in the streets, women, children celebrating in the streets. It's hard to imagine, really, living through something like that. I mean, my mother tells me of what her time was during that period. She was, I guess, a sort of early 20s, I think, but running up and down into bomb shelters, because she lived in Clydebank in Scotland. And my father was in the RAF, but he sort of, by the time he'd finished training, the war was actually over, and he was training in Canada and India. And as you say, there was always somebody. I had an uncle who sort of disappeared during the war. Nobody knew what happened to him. He was in the air sea rescue out in the Far East.
Yeah.
And he went out for a sort of second turn and never came back.
There was a lot of that, and because
nobody knew whether he was dead or alive.
Well, the great painter, the great English painter, Eric Ravilius, was a war artist, and he went out on a naval air patrol up in the seas around Iceland and never came back. And in those days, there weren't transponders or much in the way of radar tracking. You just disappeared. So it's not. There are lots of but it dominated everything, and still to some extent does. It'll be a while before it stops doing so. Though I do wonder. I don't know how people who are, say, in their 20s or early 30s respond to all this stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the trouble is the schools don't teach as much of it as you would like to think.
They teach a lot of Hitler, I think.
Yeah, they teach about Hitler, they teach about Vietnam. They don't teach an awful lot about D-Day, because I said recently I went and took my 2 teenage boys to Omaha Beach, and they didn't know that much about the D-Day landings because they don't do it.
No, whereas we were endlessly had our senses assaulted about it the whole time. We were told gold, Juno, sword.
Yeah.
And they were.
And if you go there, it really does,
Oh, it's extraordinary.
Bring it back to you, because the landscape hasn't changed. You can imagine it all going on.
There's great hulks left from when I was at Arramulch some years ago. There's still great hunks of the Mulberry Harbour there, and I think may endure for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is, but it is, say, the great moral scripture of our times. That's why people remember it still at such a long distance. Interestingly, the Russians commemorate it tomorrow.
Yeah. Because for them it was an extra day.
I'm not sure. I think they just concluded that their war with the Germans finished a day later, I think. Right. I'm not sure exactly. I have to look it up exactly when they finally took Berlin, but they said, right, our day is May the 9th. And when I lived in Moscow, it was a huge thing, because there was still a lot of veterans in the early 1990s from the war then, and all these very stocky, humorous old geezers would come out and get a bit drunk on the street and sing songs and clink their medals.
Wow.
It was rather moving.
Yeah, I bet. Let's talk about marijuana. There's a study out today in which it says that marijuana may be driving a surge in schizophrenia cases among young men. This will come as no surprise to you, Peter. Maybe behind 30% of schizophrenia cases, according to a major study by the National Institute of Health.
Well, I wish that this... It's a correlation. I have to stress this. Proving a causal link between marijuana and mental illness is extremely difficult, and I don't think anybody has done it. But there is a correlation, which has also been noticed by leading British researchers such as Professor Sir Robin Murray, who's one of the foremost psychiatrists in this country, and many people, including my friend Patrick Coburn, whose son Henry fell victim to mental illness after smoking marijuana at school, would say that there appears to be a strong connection. It's extraordinary, it seems to me, that we should be in this state of half knowledge. To say, there was a Swedish Army survey some years ago which tended to suggest this. There have been lots of other smaller studies which have tended to suggest it. It's not unreasonable to suggest that a drug which plainly has a powerful effect on the human brain might have a long-term effect on the functioning of the human brain. But there's an extraordinary resistance to drawing any conclusions from this, because at the same time there's this huge, very well-funded campaign to legalise marijuana. Legalisation would mean, of course, that it would be on the shelves in shops. It would be openly rather than covertly on sale on the internet. It would be packaged and it would be advertised, quite possibly on television.
As it is in America now.
Well, it is, because the Proposition 64, I think it was, in California, specifically contained provisions for advertising, something which it took, 40 years of hard campaigning to ban tobacco advertising, and now we have. Well, I was astonished.
A couple of years ago, I was in Los Angeles, and every billboard practically on Hollywood Boulevard, going into West Hollywood, was an advert for marijuana.
Yeah, the United States has, because it's done this state by state and pretended that the federal law against marijuana still exists, has enormous numbers of places where this is going on. And again,
yes, apparently it makes the banking system very complicated because it's a federal.
That's right.
It's still a federal offence. You can't use a bank basically, effectively, and you can't put the money into the bank if the bank is not just a local bank.
Well, this is why the legalisation campaign continues, because they want it. There's a UN convention which governs this, and particularly countries such as ours in the United States, which are members of the UN Security Council, cannot really countenance open defiance of a UN convention. So there's this big, well-financed campaign now to alter the UN convention so that they can get legalisation. But at the same time, the evidence pours in that this stuff is potentially, possibly, seriously dangerous to the mental health of those who use it. I'm amazed that we can't call a pause to campaigns for legalisation and decriminalisation while we establish whether the link is real.
Well, you would think...
Wouldn't that be a reasonable thing to ask?
Well, yeah, I mean, people have these conversations, don't they, all the time, about alcohol. They say, you know, if we didn't have alcohol, you probably wouldn't licence it now because it's so dangerous, right? How is it possible that they think smoking cigarettes is bad for you, therefore some people, including George Osborne now, want to ban it altogether, but yet you can smoke marijuana and it won't do you any harm? Doesn't make any sense, does it?
Well, it makes no sense at all. But the marijuana campaigners try to say, well, since we've got alcohol and tobacco, why shouldn't we have marijuana as well? That seems to me to be one of the stupidest arguments. We've got two dangerous legal poisons which do measurable and enormous harm to many of their users, and this doesn't seem to be to have poison number 3. And yet it's constantly pushed, and parliamentary committees and teams of supposed experts, and certainly the BBC and many other parts of the media, are constantly pushing lobbying documents calling for the relaxation of laws against marijuana, and they simply ignore the mental health issue.
Right.
And I just don't think it's possible to do this. If we say, for instance, tobacco smoking had been introduced on a large scale, and by the way, it took off basically during wartime. If cigarette smoking had been introduced on a large scale, and information was beginning to come in that it was correlated with lung cancer and emphysema and heart disease, and it was illegal, would we make it legal?
I don't think so.
No. Of course you wouldn't. So what is it about marijuana? There seems to be among a certain class of, particularly media and political metropolitan person, a belief that marijuana is great. Maybe it's because they took it at university. Maybe it's because they associate it with all the summer of love and everything else. But whatever it is,
that was a long time ago.
It is a long time ago, but there are still people around in our political system who went through that and who were influenced by it. If there is something about marijuana which has made our society relax its defences and try to put back those defences after we've legalised it is going to be incredibly difficult. We're going to have decades in which to regret.
I mean, I guess some of the driver of it might be money, because it's a very rich business.
Of course it's money, and of course governments would gain an enormous amount in taxation if they legalised it, and that's another reason why politicians are soft on it. But that doesn't mean, actually, that you have automatically to give into it. The whole point of having responsible government is that people say it doesn't matter if it's going to bring in a lot of money, if it's going to do so much harm, if we're going to have to build huge numbers of new mental hospitals, if people are going to be incapable of working, so we're going to have to subsidise them for all their lives in large numbers, if you're never going to be able to know whether the driver of your child's school bus or your doctor or your nurse or anybody doing anything for you is not high unless you have constant drug tests in places of employment, then we would probably be better off keeping it illegal, wouldn't we?
Yes, probably so. Interesting. Well, we'll talk more about it, I'm sure. We're out of time, unfortunately. Peter, thank you very much
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. Peter Hitchens back here next Monday, back in the Mail, of course, on Sundays. Every Sunday, the Mail on Sunday, but also occasionally on other bits of the week as well.